Welcome to Holly Madison's Memoir. Viewer discretion is advised due to the contents in the book. Alright, picking up where we last left off. While the showering of luxurious items was beyond anything I'd ever imagined having just a few months earlier, we didn't have the financial freedom many people assumed. Not even close. Obviously, we all wanted to save money, but Hef knew that money equals freedom to walk out the door. So he was exceptionally careful how he spent it on us. When Tina and Lisa chose Best Buy gift certificates to give each girlfriend at Christmas, Hef let it be known that he was severely displeased. I suppose gift cards too closely resembled cash for his taste. After Christmas, Lisa became the first girlfriend to depart since Adriana had left 4 months earlier. She found a modest apartment in LA and sent her 3 dogs home to her mom back east. And just like that, she packed up her things and drove off the property. Despite working regularly with Playmate Promotions, rumor had it, she ran through her savings in just a few months and ended up moving back to her hometown after all. When I heard the news, my heart sank for her. She wanted so desperately to make it, to prove wrong all of those cynics back home, who judged her decision to pose for Playboy. But I couldn't help but think that they'd been right. Where did it get her? She thought she was such hot shit, some of the girls gloated. She thought she had it made because she was a playmate and couldn't even cut it out there on her own for a few months. Wow, she had a centerfold in everything, I thought. Even booking appearances as a playmate couldn't keep her afloat in LA. They were talking about her as if she were a laughing stock. It was clear I needed to land a good job or a few decent roles before I could ever go back out on my own. I wasn't having any luck landing a centerfold, and even that wasn't looking like the most secure gig anymore. When it came to our weekly clothing allowance, I socked away as much of it as I could to pay off my student loans and credit card debt, and began creating a modest savings. It proved difficult, though, because we had to make sure that our allowance always appeared well spent. When Hazel, one of Hef's administrative assistants, suspected that a girl wasn't spending the money the way it was intended, she would let Hef know. Most of the girls were intolerable to the staff, and she was sick and tired of all the users. "You should stop giving them so much clothing allowance," Hazel told Hef. "They just wear bras and panties to the parties. They're clearly not spending it on clothes." This would always send him into a tizzy, and Tina would end up having to go to bat for herself and the other girls to make sure Hef didn't lower the allowance. It was clear that we had to have something to show for the money he gave us, and therefore it became a balancing act. Save as much money as you could, but spend enough so that our allowance doesn't get cut. Another well-placed catch-22 was the car situation. Girlfriends always got new cars while living at the mansion. Like everything else, what we drove around town in was a direct reflection of Playboy, and we had to keep up the image. Not to mention, these new fancy cars kept many females salivating over a spot in Hef's harem. Although Hef could easily buy each girl a car 10 times over if he wanted, he knew better than to buy the vehicles outright. Instead, he leased the cars for us. Doing things this way protected him from having girls drive off in paid-for cars. Plus, it was another genius way to control us. If a girlfriend decided to leave the mansion, it's unlikely she would be able to meet the payments on her extravagant new ride. So she either had to stay, risk the car getting repossessed, or leave it behind. One such car was a white Cadillac Escalade with monster truck tires, a lift kit, rims, and every other possible tricked-out add-on that was leased for former girlfriend Buffy Tyler. Buffy was a baby-faced, snub-nosed girl from Texas who had recently moved out after becoming Miss November 2000. Mary O'Connor, who had taken a liking to me, actually came to my rescue and suggested that Hef let me drive the repossessed SUV. When she mentioned my Celica, she wrinkled her nose. She was right. It looked like it belonged in a scrapyard, not in the driveway of the Playboy mansion. Happily and gratefully, I accepted, even though the car was way too big and gaudy for my taste. I can't even imagine her driving that. After all, beggars can't be choosers. Little did I know that accepting the new ride would cause the other girls to hate me even more, if that was possible. Not only was the Escalade more expensive than anything the other girls drove, but Hef had paid for all the pricey bells and whistles Buffy had installed on the car, something he wouldn't do for any of the other girls. Playing favorites and causing jealousy among the girlfriends was yet another little game he enjoyed. Obsessed with counting every last penny of who got what, the girls knew the value behind all the features Buffy had chosen for the luxury SUV. The cold shoulders I received were extra frigid for a good month after I started driving that car. Besides Christmas, clothes, and cars, the other large expense that Hef was happy to spend his money on were cosmetic enhancements. Of course. People often ask me if the girlfriends were required to have plastic surgery while living in the mansion, because it was clear so many of us did. The answer is simple and is both simple and complex. No, we were not obligated to have plastic surgery while living there. However, the mansion was a virtual breeding ground for superficial insecurities. I've said this before and I will say it again. People that have access to getting plastic surgery and cosmetic procedures regularly are the same people that have terrible mental health illness. They just have money and are able to put a little Band-Aid over their problem, fix their nose, fix this, fix that. But at the end of the day, in here is where it all starts. So I just have to remind myself that whenever I see somebody that overdoes it on plastic surgery or something, I just got to remind myself, like, the problem lies in here, not on the outside. Anyways, and most girls who live there ended up with body dysmorphic disorders. Of course, no matter how beautiful they were, these women would pick themselves apart. Excuse me. Pick themselves apart, ordering one procedure after the next. It was known that if a girlfriend did choose to undergo some sort of plastic surgery, Hef would foot the bill. The most popular procedures among the girlfriends were... Guess. Take a guess first. And you were probably correct. Which would be breast augmentations, both new and redone, rhinoplasty, and liposuction. Eventually, I would ask for my own nose job, but that was only part of my Playboy makeover. During my first few months at the mansion, I was still a college-aged girl who actually liked herself. Without school and work, I quickly became bored and filled my days with activities, typical of a 22-year-old girl. Shopping, working out, getting my belly button pierced, things like that. One day, my friend Brittany and I decided to go get tattoos. I got a small Playboy bunny tattooed in the middle of my lower back. Talk about a tramp stamp. Because I thought it was a cute, fun way to commemorate this crazy experience. This was back when I thought my mansion stay was going to be a short-lived stepping stone that would lead me to something bigger. Interesting enough, out of all the tattoos I have and all the places I have them, I actually don't have a lower back tattoo. I have no tramp stamp. Which for a woman at my age is quite rare, because most women my age that have tattoos for sure have a tramp stamp. At the time, my only real beauty routine consisted of bleaching my own roots with Clairol Ultra Blue from the drugstore. One day, as I was performing the ritual in my bedroom with the door open, one of the girls popped her head in. "What are you doing?" she snarled with a scrunched nose. "Dyeing my hair," I said defensively. What did it look like I was doing? I knew these wannabe Beverly Hill bitches looked down on anything do-it-yourself. I needed to save money. I can't spend it all at the salon. I actually hadn't been to a salon in my life. Oh, she cooed maliciously, a smirk slowly spreading across her face. That's smart. She laughed and sauntered down the hall. What she failed to tell me was that Hef had an open tab at the Jose Eber salon in Beverly Hills, and all the girlfriends had their hair and nails professionally done there several times a week. None of the girls had bothered to share this piece of information with me, because keeping me as homely as possible was in their best interests. Girl, they just all felt threatened by you and the security that you had within yourself. Let's just call it what it is. Meanwhile, months of utilizing the mansion's gym and tanning beds had taken about 10 pounds off my figure and bronzed my skin into a smooth, perfect tan. Hef's dentist had given me a bleaching kit for my teeth, which gave my smile a perfect, bright Hollywood glow. The pictures we received the morning after each of our club nights out provided me with countless opportunities to study how I photographed. I quickly set about honing my makeup skills, which were virtually non-existent before the mansion. And we didn't have YouTube or Instagram or like tutorials back then, honey. You better pick up a magazine and hope that you can follow that step-to-step process. During my first few months there, I don't think I wore much besides powder and maybe a little mascara. Compared to the Playmates' carefully contoured faces, my sparse and natural look wasn't cutting it. My work-free days gave me hours and hours to shop for and experiment with makeup. I learned how to make my lips look bigger, my eyes more cat-like, and my eyebrows fuller and more defined. I felt like I was finally beginning to look like the glamorous playmate I had always wanted to be. Staring at my photos, though, I knew there was one last thing to fix. I'd never really been fond of my nose. It was a little too big for my taste, but I rarely thought about it. It wasn't until I started seeing countless pictures of myself day after day that I realized it photographed even bigger than it was. I compared myself with the playmates in our group photos, most of whom had tiny, unnoticeable noses. Hef's favorite girls had baby faces with upturned snub noses. I call it bunny nose. I started to feel like it was about time I did something about it. While plastic surgery was a common request among the girlfriends, I was still terrified to discuss the idea with Hef. I was uncomfortable enough with my current living situation, so the last thing I wanted to do was ask for anything more. I already felt like a hooker. I didn't need to fan the flame. Eventually, though, I caved. All the other girls get procedures, I told myself. It's only fair that I should be able to get one too. I took a deep breath and approached Hef. I had spent time doing my research and decided to enlist the help of the same doctor who had performed a nose job on one of Hef's former girlfriends, a surgery so successful that Hef said he'd never seen such a transformation before. After dinner one night, I nervously brought the quote from the plastic surgeon to his room and shakily explained that I wanted to get my nose fixed. He gave me an obligatory 2-minute speech about how I didn't need the surgery, but quickly approved it despite his short-lived chivalry. It felt like a victory at the time, but I now recognize that it was one of those watershed moments in life. Sure, my new nose gave me a temporary surge of self-confidence, and I was absolutely thrilled with the results. But it wasn't my appearance that was in need of immediate attention. In a few short months, I had gone from a friendly, optimistic, confident woman to a confused girl with a nervous stammer who second-guessed every thought that went through her head and rationalized every bad decision she made. I was so focused on making it and turning this bad decision I had made into something positive that I couldn't see that all I was really doing was running faster and faster in circles, trying to please Hef and simply stay afloat in his twisted world. I had no time or energy left to chase my dreams. By this point, Tina Jordan had moved out and Hef had promoted me to his main girlfriend. One might think this would offer me some kind of protection from the mean girls, but no such luck. Actually, the other girlfriends all but shoved me into the number 1 slot. As Hef's main girlfriend, you were under the microscope. The mean girls reveled in their lives outside the mansion and didn't want the extra responsibility where Hef was concerned. Unlike the other girls, I didn't mind most of the rules. I didn't have an outside boyfriend, and I wasn't crazy about clubbing, so I didn't mind the 9 p.m. curfew. The mean girls viewed it as a win-win. If I was ever present as the main girlfriend, their lack of perfect attendance wouldn't be as heavily scrutinized. But I wasn't hot enough to be any kind of real competition for the limited Playmate of the Month spots. If they were ever asked why Hef preferred homely little old me best, I'm sure they would lie and say it was because I was the only one who slept with him, just like they all had said about Tina. Despite the presumed prestige in its title, there was nothing ceremonious about becoming Hef's number 1 girlfriend. After Tina's centerfold was published, she announced her departure. Hef simply asked me if I wanted to move into his room. That was sort of it. No promises were made. No piece of token jewelry was given. I simply prepared to pack up my things and move them down the hall. But not before Tina took the opportunity to remind me who was boss. Just as I was beginning to move to Hef's room, Tina dropped another bomb. She announced that she had decided not to move out after all. The other girls didn't even try to hide their smirks as she shared this news with me in front of everyone. It was clear I was the only one left out of this loop. My face burned red with embarrassment. So, you can just quit packing up your things, Tina said in her fake sing-song voice as she picked up her purse and followed an oblivious acting Hef out to the limo. I was hurt and embarrassed, but the subject was never broached again that night. So I just pretended the whole thing never happened. Over the next few weeks, Tina would show up halfway through movie nights only to shove me out of the way so she could sit next to Hef. She did the same thing with buffet dinners and would make a huge show out of forcing me to move my chair over so she could sit by Hef. I'm not sure if Tina was trying to make an impression on Hef so that he would be more likely to give her Playmate of the Year, or if she simply had that much fun torturing me. Eventually, though, the novelty wore off and Tina left for good. Being tossed back and forth like a useless rag doll by the man I had come to look to for approval did a massive number on my self-esteem. When I finally made the official transition into Hef's master suite, it felt anticlimactic. I was actually moving all of my belongings from a normal-sized bedroom into a tiny corner of Hef's closet called the Vanity. These cramped living quarters without even a speck of privacy was another reason none of the other girls were clamoring for the title of girlfriend number 1. The back area of Hef's closet contained a vanity, an island dresser, and closet space lining the walls. There was just enough room to walk between the island and the vanity, but that's it. In what looked like a castle's tower from the outside, the vanity had a few thin windows that looked out over the driveway, a musty rose-colored chair, and a nightstand with a small box TV were wedged in front of the windows. I later talked Hef into installing a desk in place of the TV and chair and putting down beautiful hardwood floors in place of the white carpet, which had long ago been ruined by dogs and Lord knows what else. I had a hard time believing that an elegant man like Hef, or so I assumed, preferred the nasty old carpet to the classic hardwood floors that so complemented the rest of the room. I was wrong. Instead, Hef insisted the change was a huge sacrifice he made for me, and that if this doesn't show you how serious I am about you, nothing will. That dude was tripping. Did he really just suggest that his love for me was reflected by his willingness to rip up decades-old carpet? I thought. Yes. Yes, he did. Speaking of declarations of love, now that I was Hef's #1 girlfriend, the vows of love flowed freely. He's a love bomber, of course. Just as they had to Tina days earlier. I love you was something he said often, and to anyone he was even remotely involved with, including me on what was our second night out together. I realized that was abnormal, but I came to hope that those feelings were true, particularly as he started referring to me in front of friends as the love of his life, and telling the press he expected to spend the rest of his life with me. Yeah, it'd have to be the rest of his life, because girl, you had a lot longer to live than what he did, okay? That last quote quickly turned into a punchline as late-night comedians speculated if the rest of his life meant 1 or 2 more years. I suppose the main girlfriend role did have some perks. Suddenly, playmates who had once mocked me were kissing my ass, bringing me gifts, and showering me with compliments now that I was Hef's #1 girlfriend. The sudden shift in the way some of those girls acted was completely obvious and shameless. But I suppose they thought I was too dumb to notice, or that I would be so grateful to be treated kindly for a change that I wouldn't object. The reality was, I knew I had to choose my battles wisely. I graciously accepted their gifts and their compliments, but I wasn't stupid, and I never forgot how they treated me before, when I was just the lowest blonde on the totem pole. Despite being on the receiving end of Hef's romantic declarations, and suddenly being popular with the playmates, I still wasn't exempt from Hef's harsh criticisms. Among the many unspoken rules at the mansion, the red lipstick rule was one of the more notorious. Hef hated red lipstick. It was one of the few helpful hints I managed to squeeze out of Vicki. I'm not over-exaggerating here. Hef absolutely despised red lipstick and wouldn't allow his girlfriends to wear the color. Maybe he doesn't want lipstick on his collar, Vicki had suggested years earlier. I always found it so hard to believe because Hef has such a deep appreciation for the gorgeous film stars of the golden age of Hollywood. Betty Grable, Alice Faye, and his muse Marilyn Monroe were always painted with succulent red lips. It didn't make any sense that he wouldn't want his girlfriends to exude that same kind of glamour, so I didn't take her warning too seriously. I would learn my lesson the hard way. About 6 months after moving into the mansion, I felt ready for another makeover. I loved my waist-length, thick, natural hair. In fact, it had long been the physical attribute I was most proud of, mainly because it was the only thing I had that all the other girlfriends with their extensions and clip-in locks had to buy. New girls were always coming through the mansion's revolving front door, but I was the only one with enviable hair. Until Mary Jo. She was a Southern belle flown out from Alabama for a Playmate test shoot. Oops, test shoot should be in the quotes, not Playmate. She had ass-length blonde, all-natural hair and was dead set on becoming Hef's newest girlfriend. This woman wasn't just any old blonde. She was single-handedly hijacking the only thing that made me different. I couldn't believe how threatened I felt by her. The fact that I could be so easily upset by something like this made me want to rebel, to do something that would make me an individual, so that I wouldn't constantly feel so replaced. I was cracking under the pressure of living at the mansion, and resented the fact that everyone had to look like such a clone, save for the blonde hair, the big boobs, and our shared address. I had absolutely nothing in common with these girls. So why should we have to look like we were carbon copies of one another? I decided to take it upon myself to embrace a more retro aesthetic, a look that captured the old Hollywood glamour I was so fascinated with. Think more Marilyn, less Pamela. One sunny afternoon, I decided to do the unthinkable. Chop off all my hair. I drove directly to the hair salon and instructed my stylist to cut off about 20 inches of platinum blonde hair. It was a drastic move, but I felt liberated by my short new cuff. While all the other girls were in a race to see who could have the longest hair possible, I had a flirty chin-length bob. I completed the look by having the hairdresser and makeup artist style me like Marilyn Monroe. Though I was making the change for me, I was also sure that Hef wouldn't mind. After all, he worshipped Marilyn and often cited her as the ideal and feminine beauty. When I got back to the mansion, complete with curled bob, black eyeliner, and red lips, I sat down at my vanity. This is a fun look, I thought, admiring my new reflection as I heard Hef shuffle into the bedroom. "Come in here, Puffin," I said in a happy sing-song voice. "I want to show you something." I stood up and straightened out my white Juicy Couture jumpsuit when he finally appeared in the doorway. "What did you do?" he spat at me. Instantly, I was taken aback. "I got a little makeover," I said sheepishly, giving a slight pat to my new hair. Any shred of confidence I found over the last few hours was quickly evaporating. "I thought you would like it." "Well, I don't," he hissed. Taking a moment to analyze my new makeup and hair, my eyes immediately darted to the floor. I didn't know what to say. Of all the reactions he could have had, I was the least prepared for this one. I stood there, silent. "Actually, I hate it," he continued, the words shooting like knives off his tongue. "I hate the whole look. I hate the makeup, and I hate the red lipstick." I couldn't help the tears that began streaming down my face, ruining the makeup I had been so excited about. I sank back onto the tufted stool. Was this really happening? He never yelled at me like this before. "Don't ever wear red lipstick again," he warned me in a low voice and turned toward the door. I was utterly dumbfounded. It was such an irrational reaction to something so small. Even once he saw me crying, there wasn't an ounce of sympathy in his voice. He only saw red. Pun intended. He paused and turned back around to survey my reaction, deciding he hadn't done enough damage. He served me one final blow before storming out of the room. "You look old, hard, and cheap." That was it. End of conversation. But that's how disagreements always ended with Hef. He would just stomp off and you were left to pick the pieces of your self-worth up off the floor. I'd invested every part of myself in Hef in the mansion and had nothing waiting for me outside those gates. I felt so trapped and so vulnerable to his criticisms. This old man had just humiliated me, and I sat there taking his ridicule like a child. I curled up on the vanity stool and sobbed for what felt like forever, in the one little corner of this whole giant mansion that was supposed to be my own. But even that wasn't real. It was his world. All of it. He made no mention of the conversation again. When you're the king of all you survey, you don't really need to say much more. His point was clearly made. For many years, his words rang in my ears. Old, hard, and cheap. Who says that to a person they supposedly love? The whole episode made me feel beyond ugly, as if all the beauty products and cosmetic surgery in the world couldn't make me look good. I felt like an idiot for even trying to be beautiful. Maybe I was just the homely girl who was lucky enough for Hef to allow into the mansion. That's certainly how his actions made me feel. Needless to say, from then on, I religiously stuck to corals, pinks, and nudes, never daring to try red lipstick in front of him again. Just when I was starting to give up hope that I could never find any real positivity in Hef's twisted world, someone new caught my eye. I looked up from my book and adjusted the messy bun on top of my head that was disguising my poorly received new haircut. I wonder who that is, I thought. A bubbly Carmen Miranda, costumed blonde, sauntered across the pool area, handing out shiny beaded necklaces with tiny bottles of Jack Daniels attached to all of the party goers. "Happy Cinco de Mayo!" the girl beamed, a huge gleaming smile on her face as she handed me a necklace. She had a large red headdress balanced on top of her head and seemed unusually perky. "Thanks," I said, accepting the beads and watching her walk over to Hef's backgammon table. How fun, I thought. Lately, I'd become used to putting on a cheerful facade, since on the inside I was essentially Eeyore with a rain cloud following my every step. This girl was like a ray of sunshine, so unlike the other fun in the sun party guests, all of whom spent the days self-consciously preening themselves while wearing boring basic bikinis. She seemed to glide right out of an old Hollywood musical. I bet you can't guess who she's talking about. I'll give you a hint. It's my favorite from the Girls Next Door. I assumed she worked for Playboy or Jack Daniels or something. I mean, you had to be getting paid to be that bubbly, right? That evening, after freshening up, I wandered downstairs for dinner and heard someone blurt out, "You cut your hair!" My new look had been so poorly received that I wasn't expecting any sort of compliments. When I arrived in the Great Hall, immediately I spotted Miss Chiquita Banana sitting on the bench in a clueless-inspired plaid skirt and matching top. "Oh, yeah," I finally replied, self-consciously running my hand under my new blonde bob. "I donated it to charity." "Oh, locks of love?" she asked, seeming genuinely interested. "Yeah," I said, feeling the tension in my shoulders begin to melt away. They say they don't take colored hair, but my hair is really strong, and it was super long, so I sent like 20 inches of it in case they could turn it into a wig or something. It was the most I had said in hours, maybe days. Something about this girl allowed me to relax. I didn't feel like I needed to be on guard, and I could sense that she genuinely wanted to be my friend. "Oh, that's so sweet. I've always wanted to do that," she cooed, before sticking her hand out in front of me. "I know we've met before, but I'm Bridget." "I'm Holly," I said, a smile taking over my face. "It's really nice to meet you again." Bridget started popping up around the mansion pretty regularly after that. Much to my surprise, she was just another girl invited to spend time at the mansion. Her cheerfulness wasn't an act, and she wasn't being paid to promote a brand, as I had initially assumed. She didn't have the same desperate air about her that plagued most of the girls who frequented Hef's place. Plus, she wasn't another platinum plastic wannabe. This girl was refreshingly natural. She had dark blonde hair, natural makeup, was plastic surgery free, and was always outfitted in some sort of themed ensemble. She was a walking, talking candy cane, and I liked having her around. In a way, she reminded me of myself before Hef and his girlfriends had completely stripped me of my confidence. It wasn't long before we became best friends. Her energy was contagious, making it nearly impossible to ever be in a bad mood when you're with her. Plus, it was a welcome relief to have a new friend in the house. Eventually, Bridget Marquardt became one of Hef's girlfriends when she moved in. I had already been at the mansion for more than a year and had been witness to the comings and goings of quite a few girlfriends. But for once, I didn't mind a new face taking up residence. Looking back, I often wonder if having a friend like Bridget earlier might have saved my sanity. If I had had anyone else to turn to besides Hef, maybe I would have been able to recognize the situation for what it was, instead of convincing myself to fall in love with him. Chapter 5. Alice thought the whole thing very absurd, but they all looked so grave that she did not dare to laugh. That is an excerpt from Lewis Carroll, Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. Over the year I lived with her at the mansion, Vicki became increasingly hostile. She wanted desperately to be a playmate, but Hef was done making girlfriend centerfolds. Only we didn't know that then. Hef still let the possibility linger, knowing it was the key to attracting and keeping countless young girlfriends. Earning playmate status became Vicki's obsession. A new crop of girls had moved into the mansion over the past year, and Vicki was hell-bent on beating this new group to the coveted title. It seemed to me that she felt her seniority in the group gave her an edge, or made her an exception when it came to snagging herself a centerfold. If he's not going to give me a centerfold, I'm at least going to get everything I can out of this place. Vicki fumed in my general direction. She had invited me to her room to talk about something we hadn't done since my earliest days at the mansion. After Lisa became a centerfold and moved out a few months earlier, Vicki moved up into one of the largest of rooms designated for girlfriends. I watched as she stumbled around the large pink room, trying to avoid tripping over the piles of junk she'd amassed in every corner, including those covering a long white couch that had occupied the room since the 80s. She motioned that I grab a seat on her bed, but I was unsure how to navigate the journey. I was fairly certain that this particular room had plush white carpeting, but you couldn't see the ground anywhere. Random trinkets, mementos, and tchotchkes were scattered about. A skateboard collection, a wall full of Barbie dolls still in their original packaging, an oversized aquarium, a ping pong table covered with Hello Kitty merchandise, an oversized disco ball, and a stable of inflatable unicorns. I mean, I love me some camp, but this was enough to make Angeline cringe. If getting everything she could out of this place meant becoming a hoarder, then she was succeeding with flying colors, many of which were shades of pink. I noticed that she had a piece of paper taped over a vent on the wall. "What's that?" I asked. Vicki looked over her shoulder. "Oh, that?" she asked, pointing toward the vent. I nodded. "The girls who were in here last night put that up," she nonchalantly explained. "They were up here smoking meth, and it has this, really foul smell, like rotten eggs, so they covered up the vent." I nodded again, hoping the shock and amusement wasn't readable on my face. They knew if the smell made its way down to the butler's pantry, someone might figure it out and bust them, she continued. "Huh," I said, going through a mental Rolodex of her girlfriends to figure out which one she was speaking about. "Speaking of the other girls," Vicki began, a new focus in her voice. "You know I can't stand Diana, right?" "No, I didn't," I replied. How would I know who was on Vicki's list of enemies? At the ripe old age of 29, Diana was one of the oldest in this new crop of girlfriends. She was beautiful, but there was something a little off about her. She had wild, violent mood swings and looked more like an attractive 40-something with a face full of Botox and fillers than a 29-year-old. "Okay, well, you know how when you do coke, there's a little pile in the center with some lines next to it for people to do?" She paused. It took me a second to realize she was waiting on me to respond. Quickly, I nodded. I didn't do it myself, but I'd been offered Coca-Cola countless times since moving in. It was definitely the drug of choice among the girls of the mansion. Apparently satisfied with my response, she continued. "Well, Diana doesn't do the lines. She does the whole fucking pile." Her eyes were wild as her arms flew in the air. "It's like, bring your own shit." Ooh, Vicki was heated, honey. I wondered if Vicki was high this very moment. It would explain her spastic behavior, and even why she invited me into her room in the first place. Shit, she probably was, girl. "You know Amanda, that new playmate?" she asked, jumping to the next subject without missing a beat. I actually had an answer for this one. "Yes!" I exclaimed. I'd only met Amanda a handful of times while she was shooting her pictorial, but the wholesome, dark-haired beauty definitely left an impression. She possessed an air about her, like she just walked off the pageant stage. I always noted her impeccable manners, a rarity in the playmate world. I really like her. She's so pretty and seems really classy. "Well, she's not." Vicki whirled around with a huff. Apparently that was the wrong answer, because Vicki unleashed her Amanda-focused tirade. "You know, don't you ever wonder, for a girl to want to pose nude, there has to be something wrong with her, right?" I kept my mouth shut. Her eyes narrowed on me as she waited for my response. It seemed like a loaded question since both Vicki and I were eager to become playmates. I thought she might be getting to some sort of point, perhaps whatever it was that motivated her to ask me to her room in the first place. Well, she makes a lot of money, Vicki finally said, her claws momentarily retracted. Like thousands of dollars a night. Actually, almost all of the playmates make that kind of money. Vicki paused, waiting for me to take the bait and ask how they made that kind of money. She took a seat on top of what appeared to be a small mound of dirty clothes on the white couch and began casually petting the tiny dog that had crawled into her lap. After it was clear I wasn't biting, she continued her story on her own. Take Carrie, for example, she continued, her eyes on the little animal. A recent playmate, Carrie was a 21-year-old with a 16-year-old face. She had striking green eyes, but no personality. I remembered seeing her a few days earlier at the Fun in the Sun party, droning on about her swimsuit. Do these look like pumpkins? She had asked Vicki, stretching her orange-dotted Dior bikini over her chest. Wow, I remember thinking. Playmates must make some pretty good money to be able to afford Dior bikinis. Well, Vicki continued, snapping me back to the present, she has a lot of sugar daddies. One pays for her apartment, one pays for her bills, one takes her shopping. No way, I shouted, unintentionally cutting Vicki off. Rumors of playmates working for high-class escort agencies had plagued Playboy for decades, but it wasn't common knowledge, and I'd never heard of it firsthand before. Yeah, Vicki said with a careful laugh, and everybody does it. And as casually as if she were inviting me to tea, she asked, do you think it might be something you'd be interested in? No way, I said, almost laughing. Was she really asking me if I'd consider becoming a hooker? Sure, I'd made a bad decision moving into the mansion, but I wasn't down for full-on prostitution. She wasn't going to get me this time. My eyes fell on Vicki, and I quickly adjusted my expression. I couldn't be certain, but I was fairly sure our newly rekindled friendship would be short-lived. I sputtered, uselessly trying to recover. That's just not something I'm into. Her face was starting to morph from terribly offended to wildly angry. I kept talking, hoping it would save her off the shit storm I just walked into. It's just a little much for me. There's nothing special about it. I floundered, trying in vain to come up with anything that might not piss Vicki off. I could feel the blood pumping into my cheeks, certain I was bright red. Vicki had just opened the door to her secret little world, and I slammed it in her face. Okay, whatever, she spat. Hey, I need to get ready, so I'll see you later, okay? Okay, I said, recognizing that it was my cue to leave. Oh my God, I thought. I can't wait to tell Bridget about this. I came to believe that Vicki was working for Hollywood Madam Michelle Braun, the owner and operator of the high-end escort service Nikki's Girls. In the late 1990s and early 2000s, Nikki was the premier madame who prided herself on a reputation of having the most exclusive girls in the business, many of which were playmates and even some of Hef's own girlfriends. In a 2009 New York Post article, Brown boasted, at one time, 7 of the 8 girls living in the mansion were working for me. I had one of his girlfriends in the mansion just to recruit for me. When I read this article, it was obvious to me that Vicki must have been her recruiter. I'd say so. I compared notes with a few of the other girlfriends and found that they had also been approached by Vicki. One of the girls said Vicki had confided in her that she got a cut or fee for the girls she was able to introduce to Braun. Girls were routinely convinced that these men were willing to pay a premium for simply the pleasure of their company, and not necessarily for sex. But, from what I understand, that was almost never the case. While I was at the mansion, there were a handful of girls who refused the invitation to hook. Bridget was never even approached, but I have no idea what went on before I got there. A few years ago, Braun's client and employee list circa 1999 surfaced on the web. Gossip site HollywoodInterrupted.com published the documents. Among the many notable names were Hef's former girlfriends, Mandy and Sandy Bentley, as well as his former main girlfriend, Tina Jordan. In 2009, Braun was indicted after pleading guilty to transporting women across state lines for the purpose of prostitution and money laundering, and was sentenced to 3 years probation and 6 months of house arrest. Whew, they really went hard on her, didn't they? The women were tempted with the lavish life that a $1,000 weekly allowance certainly wouldn't provide for. They would travel all over the world and make upwards of $25,000 to spend an evening with whoever was willing to shell out the cash. Girls were making money hand over fist. They became addicted to LA's opulent lifestyle, expensive cars, designer handbags, luxury apartments, and sadly for many of these women, the majority of their income went to supporting some pretty nasty drug habit. Well, you gotta find a way to mentally escape if that's the way that you're making your money. And sadly, that's what a lot of people in Hollywood still do to this day. The way you think that they're making their money is not the true way they're making their money. It's actually by doing stuff like this. But if you're listening to me read this, you probably already know that. At the end of the day, whatever their reasons for making this choice, I never judged them, and I certainly don't now. Vicki, however, disgusts me. If she was indeed Michelle Braun's recruiter, then she preyed on the young, naive women who tumbled into LA with stars in their eyes and used them for her own gain. In 1997, 80s playmate Rebecca Ferrati made headlines when she participated in an true Hollywood story titled The Sultan and the Centerfold. Ferrati recalled her spiral into the world of prostitution. In her day, high-end call girls were being shipped off to Brunei to meet their clients. In the early 2000s, Turkey was a hot spot for these LA-bred escorts. And nowadays, it's Dubai. Braun said during a 2008 Rolling Stone interview that her big break in the escort business was landing Turkish billionaire Hakan Uzan as Nicki's girl's client. The article named playmate Tishara Casino, and Playboy cover girl Ashley Mazzaro as employees, as well as Tina. Hakan would send me an instant message at 3 a.m. and I would have to get 4 playmates ready right away, Braun told the magazine. The first flight to Istanbul was around 6 a.m. through Paris, and sometimes I'd wake them up in the middle of the night for that flight. The madam was arrested in 2007 and revealed details about her global hooking empire during the Rolling Stone interview. But Playboy and Hef had known about the racket for years. In fact, Hef even launched his own private investigation into the matter in hopes of shutting down Nicki's girls and other agencies standing on the shoulders of the Playboy name. The hypocrisy here is palpable. Considering Hef kept his own harem of sorts, it's easy to see the mansion as a getaway to hooking. But Hef was determined to plug this leak. Not necessarily for the benefit of the girls, I believe, but to maintain Playboy's image. It wouldn't look that good if a majority of playmates graduated to sex for pay. Playboy was supposed to be classy after all. Eventually, I learned more about the situation from Mary O'Connor, who had become a close friend. During my morning visits to her office, I would hear about the goings-on and frequently come across documents pertaining to the investigation. Instinctively, I grabbed a stack of contract sheets off Mary's desk, thinking it had to be negatives from the newest Playboy test shoot, something I always pored over. My heart sank when I saw what the images actually were. In the photos was a red-faced, swollen-eyed playmate, one that I knew well, wearing a hot pink wig, looking like she was drugged out of her brain, posing nude for the unknown photographer. She was subjecting herself to the most repulsive and demeaning positions. She was showing parts of her anatomy never even seen in the pages of Playboy. In fact, I'm not sure you'd even some of this stuff in Hustler. In her drug-fueled state, she must have thought the hot pink wig would sufficiently mask her identity, despite her face being very clearly on display. Hef was determined to put an end to the Playboy prostitution ring. Still unaware he had an enemy under his own roof, and put new restrictions in place to better ensure that his centerfolds weren't participating in Nikki's girls. If he found out that one of his playmates had been associated with this ring, that person would be stripped of any Playboy responsibilities. I don't even think he considered that any of his girlfriends had been participating. As soon as word of these new restrictions started circulating, it didn't take long for girls to start panicking. "Holly, I need your help," the breathless caller squeaked through the splotchy connection. As 2002 was nearing its end, it was time for Hef to select Playmate of the Year. Amanda was in close contention with a handful of other girls, and I was not so quietly rooting for the fresh-faced beauty. I thought she was warmer and friendlier than most of the other candidates, and would make a good representative for the magazine. While Amanda and I had met a few times, we were by no means close. So when one of the mansion butlers rang my room from the pantry switchboard to tell me Amanda was on the line, I was surprised. "Sure, what do you need?" I said. I figured she wanted me to put in a good word with Hef about her candidacy. People always thought I had a lot more leverage than I did. "I need you to talk to Hef," Amanda begged, sounding desperate. "They told me I was getting Playmate of the Year, but now they're saying they aren't going to give it to me." Immediately, my conversation with Vicki months earlier popped into my head. "Why?" I asked, hearing my own trepidation. "They asked to see my passport," she explained urgently, "and I don't have it." "Why do they want to see your passport?" I asked, already suspecting the answer. "I don't know," she lied. "Well, where is it?" I felt like I was interrogating her, but it was clear she was trying to manipulate my position. If Hef knew she was a prostitute, I couldn't very well campaign for her as Playmate of the Year. "I left it at my mom's in Washington," she cried. I could hear the panic in her voice. Her dreams were vanishing before her very eyes. "Can't she just FedEx it?" I said, offering the simplest solution. She probably had her passport sitting in front of her as she spoke to me, but I couldn't let on what I suspected. "No," she said, offering no further explanation. There was no place left for the conversation to go. I can try to talk to him, but he doesn't always listen to me. Ever listen to me, I thought. "But if this is really important to you, you should try to get your passport." "Thanks, Holly," Amanda said, letting out a defeated sigh. "I know you were supportive of me, and I really appreciate it." I later discovered that in order to stop the prostitution problem, Hef mandated that any playmate found to be working as a call girl would be banned from working any promotional appearances for the magazine. The same fate applied to girls who posed for competing magazines such as Penthouse and Hustler. As these were much more explicit competing publications, Hef considered this a branding issue. To serve as a message to future playmates, that year's Playmate of the Year candidates had to submit their passports for review. They were on to the Turkey connection, and if any girls had a stamp from that country, they were taken out of contention, as well as were girls unwilling to hand over their passports, apparently. While many playmates continued working for Nikki's girls, the promotional pay from Playboy couldn't compete with the escort business. I understand that Hef eventually decided to call off the investigation just as they had gotten close to a bust. No pun intended. Maybe he knew he couldn't do anything to control the former playmates, but hoped that word of the Playmate of the Year passport check had done enough to scare the following year's group of girls. Plus, Hef must have wanted to avoid the story leaking to the press, as it eventually would. At the end of the days, Playboy playmates turned prostitutes still isn't a good headline for the brand. But while Hef knew many of the playmates were moonlighting as call girls, he and his detectives were still completely oblivious to the business Vicki was apparently conducting under his very nose with his own girlfriends. Why didn't I tell Hef what I believed about Vicki? because I knew that if I told him what I thought Vicki had tried to recruit me to be an escort, he would run and tell her verbatim what I said. She would, of course, deny any involvement. Hef might choose to believe her, reprimand me for spreading catty gossip, and then I would be subjected to Vicki's vengeful wrath. No, thank you. Even after reports came out implicating Hef's girlfriends in the Nikki's girls escort ring, I don't know if he ever figured out who was Braun's inside girl. In the end, it was a different money-making scheme that sealed Vicki's fate. Back in the early 2000s, invites to the mansion were still a prized commodity, and there was a market of wealthy men willing to pay top dollar for a spot on Playboy's executive party guest list. As girlfriends, it was understood that we could invite a few family members and friends to attend each of the mansion's decadent soirees. Even the hustler Vicki saw this as the perfect opportunity to make some extra cash. Like she said, she was going to milk this place for all that she could. For a small fortune, Vicki would secure eager partygoers a spot on the coveted guest list under her own name, telling the office they were cousins or close friends, and because greed seeped out of her pores like sweat, she couldn't help but recruit the other girlfriends to do the same. Vicki would do all the heavy lifting for a cut of the profits, naturally, and all the girls had to do was give the names to the office administrators before the party. I believe I was the only girlfriend she didn't approach about this scheme. My reaction to her hooking proposal must have turned her off. Vicki's greed was her own worst enemy. While it was in everyone's best interest, the clients and the girls, to keep the escort ring as discreet as possible, the Playboy guest list racket was less distasteful. So naturally, people talked, and word eventually found its way to Hef. And I am running out of time, so I'm going to wrap up this part. I hope to see you on the next one.